Oh.
Hello. Hey, David and Marie, it's so good to see you today.
Hi, good to see you again.
Hi.
Yeah, see you for a third time today. So we're here to talk about Webtoon and DC's collaboration and kind of the digital comic space, the webcomic space, and how it's a logical evolution that goes alongside the comic book space and the traditional comic book community. So Marie, I would love to know when you realized Webtoon was the perfect collaboration for DC, because you've spoken quite frequently about digital comics existing in the comic space for a long time. But what's the difference between a digital comic and a web comic in this?
I mean, Webtoon is a digital comic, right? But essentially, comics have tried many times to sort of crack that nut of what is a successful digital comic, beginning, of course, in the late 90s, when we would sort of put up these little JPEGs that took forever to load, and they were pixelated, and that didn't work so well. And then we sort of moved on to things with hyperlinks, and that always had the feeling of being a CD-ROM, so that didn't really work out. Next up was motion comics, which were super fun, but they look kind of like an old animation that you
3 frames a second
in the 60s. Yeah. So we eventually landed on something called Digital First, where we would take a regular size comic page and we'd cut it in half, and then each half would be a page displayed on a sideways iPad. And that lasted a while, but in all of these instances, what we were sort of trying to do was replicate a physical experience. So in the beginning, you would even see page turns, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not really the best use of a brand new space.
Yeah.
So at some point, I was like in the morning, I woke up and I was sort of like, oh, scroll, looking at some webtoons, and then it's like, oh, that's it. The digitally native format. That's where we want to be.
Yeah, something that we've kind of talked about preparing for this is people often think that comics are a form, but actually it's an art, and then you can tell them in different formats. So David, could you speak a little bit about the Webtoon format?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a recurring theme today, but I think comics are comics, and I think Webtoon is just a different way to sort of deliver comics, and I think there's an aspect of technology which I guess fits in with the theme today here that helps to lower the barrier for distribution method online, and also I think there are technologies at work that also help sort of lower the entry for production. So I think there are a lot of things at play, but I think what Webtoon is trying to do is really making comics more accessible to a different audience, and I think what we often find on Webtoon is that a lot of audience discover comics, like the joy of reading comics for the first time on Webtoon. So I think for them, comics is innately digital, which is very interesting because I think it sort of shows the potential of the bigger comics audience that we can grow. And I think it's also interesting to see, tying in with our partnership with DC, we also see that this growth in the digital space feeds very positively into the traditional print market, because people who discover joy of reading comics also want to get their hands, get comics in their hands.
Yeah, like some of the comics, we'll look at them in a little bit, but they take these famous DC canon characters and put them into this new space, which, when people fall in love with them there, they can then go to a comic shop and find them somewhere else. So Marie, could you talk a little bit about how the collaboration with DC and Webtoon began and the process of it? Actually, that's better directed to David. David, would you talk about that?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, just could you talk a little bit about the origin of the collaboration with DC and Webtoon?
Oh, yes, the origin of collaboration. This is quite the story. When I first heard that DC was venturing into vertical comic I was like, yes, finally. I've been doing this for 6-7 years. I've been waiting for this moment. And I grew up, I don't know if it's also a thing in Canada, but I grew up watching Batman Beyond on WB5 prime time. Like those were the days. So just, to be able to bring over the characters of my childhood and adulthood into a format that I love and embrace, it's like, this is a perfect match. I want to do this. I want to make it happen. Whatever corporate level challenges, I'll find a way. And I mean, everyone on all levels were so excited and so supportive and very collaborative. And DC was very open to Webtoon, sort of, empowering Webtoon to really explore the format. And I think it really resulted in a very positive collaboration where we're able to take full advantage of the medium and what this could bring. And that's the Wayne Family Adventures, which provides a slightly different slice of life aspect to an 80-year-old character that's so beloved for such a long time, and giving it a fresh sort of spin and turnaround.
Yeah, Wayne Family Adventures was the first part of the collaboration, and it was such a massive success, and it was a great showcase for that two-way street, because this is a character, like you said, 80 years of history, and it brings in many of his sidekicks to live in his house, which is something that a lot of comic book fans have always wanted to see. So Marie, could you talk about how it felt to see that be embraced by comic shop readers, as well as the huge response it got on Webtoon?
Oh, it's great. It's great. It's like the thing you never knew you wanted, right? So what we're doing effectively is reaching a brand new audience, and the comic stores love it too, right? Because everybody is like, oh, I never thought about this aspect before. Like Bruce Wayne, he's a loner. We all know he's a loner, right? But actually, Bruce Wayne has a habit of always mentoring other heroes. So in this story, they all just come to live with him. And it's so funny and so entertaining. And usually Batman, you've got a brooding story, but this is just super fun. And it appeals to the audience who traditionally reads Webtoon, right? So they're on their phones and they're scrolling. They don't necessarily come from the same world that I come from, where you go to a comic shop and you buy a physical periodical or a book. And it's been really, really great to see everyone embrace it, right? So even the fans who typically read paper have been enjoying this on their phones.
Yeah, I have a pull list at a comic shop, so I have my subscriptions, but I also read Webtoons. I love Wayne Family Adventure. And Den of Geek, who I'm here with today, that was voted our #1 comic the year that it debuted. So that crossover is huge. And the next collaboration between you was Vixx and NYC. So David, you put a lot of work into building a really authentic team to tell that story. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think when we first sat down with DC team and when we were planning out our slate for our partnership, I think there was an aspect of definitely sort of delving into this different format. There was a desire to expand and diversify some of the audience. And I think Wayne Family Adventures was very focused on activating a huge fandom that already existed on such huge character that everyone is already very familiar. Vixen was focused on fleshing out a lot of the characters and building them and giving a lot of them screen time so that we can provide something that's different and really diversify the audience. And like Vixen, Bumblebee, Grace Choi, I think these are characters that you don't, and Beast Boy, that you don't see every day on screen, so people are not super familiar with. And I think this coming of age story about a college girl moving to New York is a wonderful sort of mash to also, like, on not just on DC side, but on Webtoon side, we're also trying to sort of expand our audience group because we have we can divide our audience group into maybe largely 4 quadrants of romance, action, and there's like horror, thriller, supernatural crowd, and then we have comedy and slice of life. And I think what we tend to observe is that romance audience, like the mass audience, like to stay in their comfort lane. Like romance audience likes to continue consuming romance. Action audience likes to continue reading more action. And this was an attempt for us to provide our romance audience something different, provide a little bit more action to a character who speaks to them. And the creative team is amazing. Jasmine Walls is a Black Queer experienced comics writer who very quickly were able to sort of adjust to the Webtoon format. And we're lucky to be able to work with Manu, the Haitian American artist, who are already very familiar with the format based on her previous experience in Webtoon Canvas on the UGC platform. So, I mean, both talents combined, I think just is generating a really, really authentic story and compelling characters.
Yeah, I think something that's really cool about Vixen is this is only the second collaboration, and we're already talking about the DC characters and the DC stories bringing two different parts of the Webtoon audience together. So Marie, Vixen is a character and a story that you're very passionate about. Could you talk a little bit about where it sits in DC and why it's so important?
Sure. I love Vixen NYC because she's your POV character. Like, she is you. You're having that experience. She starts the story off on a trip to Ghana where she acquires a family heirloom. I'm sure that
spoiler
is nothing.
Alert.
Yeah, spoiler, right? And then she comes to New York, and she's very excited, but it's so horrifying because it's so loud, and there's all these animals and rats and noises, and she's evolving into a hero, and she's a normal person at first, so you're just sort of having the journey with her. And she happens to meet a green guy who likes animals, and she is roommates with Bumblebee. And as a reader, I'm seeing each one of these things for the first time because I'm deliberately not reading these scripts in advance so that I can enjoy the webtoon the same way that the audience is. So I'm just really excited because she's so down to earth. Yeah. And you can just sort of see that the story is just going to get really big and exciting.
Yeah, we've talked about them, so let's take a look at some of the collaborations that we've kind of seen so far. Webtoon DC, there's both of you. And then there's the Wayne Family Adventures, seeing those good heroes up there. I think this was the moment, something that we've talked about is the moment when DC really embraced the notion of it being a webtoon comic, and I think that art is a really great style there. So, Marie, could you talk about just embracing webtoon, not just as a format, but also embracing its audience and the style of art that people wanted to see, kind of just giving them that freedom to tell the story?
Sure. So, in traditional comics, we do have a certain thing we call continuity, and what that really means is that there's a history. Every character has a story, then a history. We do reinvent it sometimes, but the basics are always there. And we would never have thought to do this story, honestly, because like Batman is Batman. He's off brooding. The various he's only got one Robin at a time. We've got our rules. And when we met with Webtoon, and they come from a different generation, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Like Webtoon is really digital natives, like people who didn't ever have to make a transition. My generation, we transitioned, right, from paper to digital, and now we live in both worlds. But digital natives, they might see it a different way. So they sort of threw it all in a blender and they were like, let's pick out the things that we want to make a story, much as you would if you were making a movie, using the entire 80 years of history of DC. And came up with them all living together as roommates in a slice of life. It's hilarious.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
Yeah, you might see them fight over the last cookie, for example, that Alfred has made.
You might get a mug that comments on Batman's parenting skills. That was one of my favorite moments. And David, I think something that you've talked about that I think is really cool is this comic specifically, it was taking the webtoon style, taking the DC canon, but also embracing like a huge fan audience for these characters that hadn't necessarily been served. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this was a very interesting project. I mean, and I keep staring at the art. It's beautiful. I
It's
gotta
so
give
beautiful.
shout out to Starby, the artist. But I think what was very interesting, especially when we started sort of observing what's happening in the comments, is that I think I could see both communities, who are following Webtoon and DC for a while, like really merging together. I was having this conversation with someone here at this conference, and then I was explaining what I do and what this panel was about, and they were like, "What? There are multiple Robins?" And I'm like, it hit me like, yeah, there are. Not everyone's very familiar with that idea because people, some people aren't necessarily familiar with the whole lore, and I think there was an excitement in the comments where there are like true fans coming in, sort of guiding and walking through people who's not super familiar with the concept behind Wayne family, and people are pointing out, yeah, that's canon. Yeah, he was killed. Yep, the dinosaur thing is real, and I love the community sort of merging together, and I think it's just makes comic what it is.
Yeah, something that I think as well is like that we see with this and with Vixen, it's that joy of discovery. Like you said, the Vixen characters, that is a lineup that maybe people don't get to see a lot. You're taking those stories that people have been looking for, but they haven't dug deep enough,
Right,
and you're
like,
making
who's
it
Team
accessible.
Drake? Who's Cass?
Exactly.
Who's that? I want to learn more about them.
Yeah, and Marie, when it comes to kind of the next generation of stories that you guys are telling together, could you sort of like tease what you're most excited for?
Well, we've got Red Hood coming out, and we've got Zatanna. But I'm going to let David speak to those.
Yeah, let David announce the...
Okay, well, I mean, if you let me do the honor, we have Zatanna and the Reaper coming out July 11th. And Zatanna and the Reaper, I think the title spoils it a little bit, but it's about Zatanna getting sent back in time to when Reaper existed. And I don't think this is a spoiler, and I'm pretty sure we also put it out, but obviously I think with Zatanna, I think you kind of want to expect anyone who's familiar to see John Constantine.
Yeah.
And our art lead was a big, who pitched the Wayne family idea, is also a huge fan of Zatanna. So she's really taking a lot of extra personal steps to make sure that she looks perfect and she looks the way that a true fan would want to imagine. So we're very excited with this particular story, and it also kind of fills our supernatural mystery bucket. And the other series that I'm also very personally excited for is Red Hood and the Outlaws. It's about the Dark Trinity. I don't know, like I think everyone, I'm just shocked that more people are not familiar with Bizarro. He's so great. And Artemis being sort of, I guess everyone sort of being that shamed child of Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman. I think it's just such a fun idea, and really fitting with the time. So I'm very, very excited to see this story unfold. And I think this is a good opportunity to also, really showcase this format and the medium to a traditional audience as well. Like I've said, I think what Webtoon is doing is really using the technology to change the distribution. But I think the inherent qualities of storytelling and what makes a good character, what makes a compelling story, I think it's the same, and we already have the material thanks to DC working on this character for 80 years.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, Marie, something we were talking about was Red Hood is a character who, in the circles that I run with, and I know journalists who only write about Red Hood, I know people who Red Hood is that favorite character, and you sort of gave a good backstory on who Red Hood is and why people care about him, and I think this has the potential to really cross over to that comic shop market and bring even more comic shop readers to Red Hood. So could you talk a little bit about Red Hood and Jason Todd?
Sure. So Red Hood, so when we say Dark Trinity, I don't know how many fans of comics are here, but the actual Trinity in DC is Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, right? So Red Hood in his Dark Trinity, that's 3 members of those families, right? So Red Hood, Artemis, and Bizarro, And I was sort of thinking earlier, why is Red Hood so popular with a certain demographic? And I realized that it's essentially a millennial thing, maybe, because Red Hood, some of you may recall the infamous stunt where people voted on if Robin would die in the 90s, and people killed Robin. Like,
It was shocking. R.I.P. Jason Todd.
They had drawn both. The Robin lives and Robin dies, and you people killed Robin. So, well, probably not you guys, but
maybe your parents.
People called in and they killed Robin. That Robin was Jason Todd. And Jason Todd did stay dead for a long time, but of course in comics, nobody really stays dead except for Uncle Ben. So eventually, Jason Todd came back as Red Hood. So Red Hood is, the opposite of Batman in many ways, even though they live together in Wayne Family Adventures. And Red Hood uses weapons, for example. He's a very dark version of Batman. Batman would never use a gun, except in the ancient past, which we try to
in the 40s maybe.
which we never look at. And Artemis is a replacement Wonder Woman from the 90s who eventually didn't make it, and Diana came back, and Artemis went off to do her own thing, and Bizarro is, of course, Bizarro. So you all know we live in Bizarro world sometimes, and that is, of course, the opposite of everything.
Yeah, it's opposite
right? So
worlds.
Bizarro says no when he means yes, for example. So this is the Dark Trinity. We are very excited to see how it is approached on Webtoon as opposed to how we see it every month.
Yeah, and I think something that David, we were speaking to, like Wayne Family Adventures has this slice of life softness. Vixen is this coming of age, but the Jason Todd story and the Red Hood story, it's going to speak to a different aspect of Webtoon and a younger audience base, which is the angsty father-son. He is Batman's failure, which is something Marie said. So could you talk a little bit about bringing that vibe to the Webtoon?
I think it's very interesting because I think what Marie was just doing here, explaining Dark Trinity, because I think I saw some people nodding in the front row, and I think some people in the back were like, wait, what's going on? Who's that? And learning is exactly what we're doing on, trying to do on this series. It's like introduce these characters and lores that's so interesting, but just sort of, letting more and more people get into it. And I personally find it very enjoyable to see a very different dad energy between Bruce Wayne in the Red Hood and Bruce Wayne in Wayne Family. And I don't know, it's a part of perk of my job is I get to read a lot of these in advance. I'm like, read the Red Hood version, and then I go back and read the Wayne Family adventure, and then it's very therapeutic for Jason.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be very exciting to show that they're to be able to show such range of characters of this amazing series.
Yeah, and I think something that these Webtoon collaborations do that is very much in the tradition of comic books and what they've always done over this almost 100-year history is reinvention of characters. Marie, that's something you can speak to. These characters often die, come back, are reimagined in a different way. Batman's a vampire in the Elseworlds. There's all different ways you can tell a story. How has it been to kind of see Webtoon as an expansion of that classic comics tradition?
It is an expansion, and that's not to say that we do not constantly reinvent.
Yeah.
But there are just certain lines that we wouldn't think to cross because we have our sort of continuity and our systems, and I know that Batman does this and Superman does that. So it is, it's an absolute pleasure to watch these new writers and artists from this really other world sort of take on our characters and maintain the immutables. They still have their characteristics, and DC reviews every script, but put them together in these new and fresh ways that I simply had never thought of.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I love the idea of a kid who reads, or an adult, people discover comics at all ages, who reads Vixen NYC and then goes to their comic shop and says, where do I read about Bumblebee? Where do I read about Vixen? And that's kind of the dream. So for both of you, David, I'll start with you. What are you most excited about for the future of this collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's a really good time to celebrate comics, and I think technology is doing a lot of justice to help really broaden this market. And about a week in from the launch of this series, I remember, because I cherish this moment because I was so excited. I was able to send email to DC team, including Marie here and Jim Lee. Very, very much of an honor. And then I was like, the bat has safely landed on top of Webtoon building and it sort of, I was implying that the series has taken the top spot on Thursday, which is not an easy thing to do with the amount of audience, but now it has over 15 million views globally. It has over 1 million subscribers, and I love the fact that it's sort of introducing characters to a lot of people who may not have been familiar, and then just pulling them more into world of comics. And for people who are already familiar with comics, I love that idea that people are more accepting and embracing of this new format and doesn't see it as something that's just foreign. And I think there's a constant battle for comics industry to fight, like comics are this, comics are that comics are for kids, comics are for whoever, but I think comics are for everyone, and I think this is a good beginning to sort of prove that it is.
Yeah. Marie, how about you?
That's really funny, because when I first started in comics in the Stone Age, it was always a battle to convince people that comics were not for kids. It went completely in the opposite direction over about 20 years. And at this point, I'm like, we do have comics for kids. Honest, we do have comics for kids.
Kids still read comics.
But I am most excited, really, about the potential that this brings us for the future. As the editor-in-chief of DC Comics, I have a lot of responsibility to the past, the present, and the future. So like Dr. Manhattan, I exist in all of these spots at once, right? So I'm trying to be respectful of all of the great stories and creators that brought us to where we are, while still, of course, coming up with refreshing constantly the line for the existing readers. And what we've also got now is we're addressing the future. So we're seeing new ways that people can read about our characters and our stories and come into our ecosystem. And I'm most excited about the stories.
I'm like, oh, there's somebody mysterious in the space.
Is that our cue?
Yeah, I think so. Well, thank you so much for coming to this panel. And
thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you.